Call Clayton Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of New Zealand First and join in the chorus of sound in opposition to this current legislation. And Mr Scott, being in the Select Committee with me, you would have read our minority report. To be clear, I'd like to just take a moment to read that out for the people back home that don't have the back here. This is very good. Here we go. New Zealand First does not support this bill. Clearly, there are benefits to businesses and individuals with a reduction of ACC levies. However, the government should acknowledge the reason that levies are so high in the first place was due to this government's unwillingness to rectify a higher than required levy problem, which they knew existed, but instead increased those levies higher and further to offset the books. Moreover, nowhere in the bill is there a clear reference to levy reductions, Mr Speaker. New Zealand First supports open and transparent government at all times, and not just when the government thinks that it is necessary. We support the setting of a funding policy that improves the transparency of the levy setting process, which would ensure the public is better informed. And Mr Scott, you talked to Labor about them looking back all the time, and the only thing that I was looking forward to was the end of your speech. But to be brutally honest, Mr Speaker, sometimes in order to move forward, you have to look back. And what you have to do when you look back at those mistakes that this government's made is apologise to the people of New Zealand for the muddying of the waters and the deceit that has been created under the current organisation of the running of the ACC. Now, there is not a New Zealander, there is not a person that enters this country that doesn't think that our ACC organisation is absolutely stellar. It is a sterling organisation because, of course, it looks after those people that are having accidents in workplaces, on the sports field and in their homes. And it gets them rehabilitated, mended up and back out there into the real world. But how we're funding it is absolutely a disgrace. Businesses, like many businesses around the country, have been gouged, been sent absolutely unacceptable charges through from and using ACC as the way to fund it. It's just unacceptable. Now, when I've got my ACC levies put in front of me, there's no breakdown of where this money's going. There's no breakdown letting businesses know what they're actually paying and where it's actually going to. In actual fact, if you get anybody to do work in your business, you would expect a full breakdown of the mileage that they've travelled, the equipment that they've used, the hourly rate that they're charging out. ACC doesn't give you that breakdown because, of course, where this money has been going to is to try and balance out the books, to try and get this government into some sort of surplus. When we look at this, the Accident Compensation Financial Responsibility and Transparency Amendment Bill, goodness me, that does sound good. I mean, those words in themselves, financial responsibility and transparency. And yet this government has to put a bill together to actually be financially responsible and transparent is beyond me why we've even got this bill sitting here in front of us. It's an absolute nonsense. This government should have always been open and transparent with the public, with New Zealanders. This government should have always been responsible with the money that they have collected and made sure that it is gone for the purposes of New Zealand.
That's right.
New Zealand First is very concerned, given a legislative stop date of 2019 for these residual levies being paid by current rates of collection, the government will have collected or over-collected $852 million from the work account, $155 million from the earners account, and $468 million from the motor vehicle account. What a disgrace. By 2019, that's $1.475 billion that New Zealanders are going to be forking out under this current legislation. $350 million a year has been overcharged to New Zealanders, and with no apology, no looking behind themselves and saying, look, we might have done a little bit of a disservice to the businesses of New Zealand. We apologise to all those people that have overpaid. We would like to give you some of that money back. But no, it has gone out into your whimsical direction, trying to somehow wastefully spend money on foreign Saudi Arabian farm deals, flag referendums and everything else that they can waste this New Zealanders' money on. It's not good enough, Mr Bailey, Mr Scott, you should be ashamed of yourself, and if I was your mother, I'd be looking for a disownment. At the end of the day, Ms. Nikki Kaye, the Minister Nikki Kaye has come out and said in a statement here that this will actually reduce levies by around about $500 million. Now, that is commendable. If I could just find my piece of paper with her comments on it. Here it is. Don't panic, I found it. Here it is, I knew it was here. Budget 2015 will signal ACC is on track to provide further levy cuts to around $375 million in 2016 and 17 and a further $120 million in 2017 and 18. It's not coming fast enough. You have been over-collecting for such a long time that this should be an immediate saving. Nowhere in this bill, nowhere does it say that those savings are going to be coming forward immediately. We do, New Zealand First, have some serious concerns about the use of the term order in council. And there is some serious issues with order in council. And just for the House's information, currently, in current legislation in New Zealand, there is 798 references in current legislation referring to order in council. And for those people back home and those people that aren't fully understanding what order in council means, it basically means that the Cabinet get to decide what happens and when and how. And if you look, it happens all the time. Order in council is absolutely rife in this current government. And it's interesting to note that the United Nations Conventions Against Corruption came out and said that a place corruption thrives is, hear this, lack of transparency of decision-making. For example, large numbers of decisions being made by order in council. So the United Nations are concerned about it, and yet you just fob it off. You throw it by order in council into your legislation so that the rank and file New Zealanders aren't part of the decision-making process, and that is a shame on this government. You're talking about being open and transparent. You're talking about being fiscally responsible, and you're not doing it by putting in an order of council.
Correct.
Mr. Speaker, I settle myself. We are also concerned in relation to the proposed levy-setting framework, which is put out in the explanatory notes, or just came through as one of the briefing notes. And it goes through a series of steps of how this, the ACC levies are going to be set. And I'd just like to step the people through this, if I could. So it starts off with government sets a funding policy target, horizon and transitions. It goes on to ACC calculates the levies based on government funding policy. Moves to the next step. Public and stakeholders consultation. It's where the public can get involved and have their say about what's going on. To date, it's ticking all my boxes. It's given me all the 2 thumbs up. Moves on to ACC board recommends levy rates. Next box, Minister for ACC also receives levy advice from the MB and the Treasury incorporating considerations of public interest. The final step we go into, Cabinet sets new ACC levies considering recommendations from ACC, MB and Treasury. But when we get to the very last part, Cabinet may, let me quotate that, may follow ACC's recommendations, but more than likely probably won't. Moving down, Cabinet may choose to set alternative rates having regard to broader public interests. This order in council, when we've got the Cabinet making final decisions on things, is exactly what's got us into the situation for us to be discussing this bill in the first place. It's unnecessary. We have to go back and look at the past of this country to know where we're heading in the future. An apology and some repayments back to those people that have been overcharged those levies would go a long way in our book to resolve this. And to finish off, Mr. Speaker, I just want to bring your attention to the situation that we find ourselves in under the ACC transparency and whatever the nonsense they talk about is, with regards to what's happening around high-risk cars, because we know it's a real issue. We've heard it time and time again, and I can give you an example where I have got a very, very dear friend of mine who has 2 cars. He has a very high-powered 4.2-litre supercharged V8, and he's got a nice around-the-town car for a little bit of the shopping, which is a 1.3-litre Hyundai Getz. And yet this car, the round-the-town car, is absolutely, has been charged exorbitant rates in his registration fees for ACC of $138, whereas big 4.2 litre supercharged V8 is at $68. And I dare say that this piece of legislation here in itself, and with no recourse for changing that, this is actually a taxation on those people that are buying affordable small cars. It's a tax on the poor, which this government constantly does. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, I call the Honourable Maurice Williamson.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much, and what a great delight it is to speak